You know what? There's nothing better than going to a beach after a rainstorm to see the calmness of the sea and enjoy the ocean's tranquility. But, this is a big but, you might want to stay away from those areas after you hear what a recent study found in the ocean spray after storms near rivers where sewage is disposed of during the storms. It might sound a little confusing, but we'll get to it. A recent study found that after they sampled ocean spray in the air, found sewage particles carrying bacteria, viruses, and potentially other nasty things in the air after a storm hit. The study becomes scary after realizing how far inland the aerosols can travel and via the ocean spray. We're going to talk about that on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. So let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting yet gross episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. This is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, what you can do to speak up for the ocean, and how you can live for a better ocean by taking action. The action here might not be what you expect. It might be stay away from beaches after storms where, you know, some of these rivers take on a little bit of sewage or sewage dilution from that goes into the ocean. And this is why, because a recent study found that there were sewage particles in a particular river, an Imperial River, that's in Southern California. Now, the river starts and the sewage comes from northern Mexico in Tijuana, and it travels north of the border into Imperial River, which empties out just south of San Diego in California and goes into the ocean. Now, normally what happens, you would expect, and this river I know has had some major problems in the past with sewage and the water quality there, but normally when sewage is disposed of into a river, like I said in the last episode when we talked about sort of nutrients, there's always a number at the bottom, at the end of that pipe that goes into the river from the sewage treatment of what specific, I guess I would say products in the water have to be. So ammonia, nitrite, nitrate, as well as phosphate have to be down certain levels. And of course, just like any types of viruses or bacteria that could be, that should be filtered out through the sewage treatment plant. And normally sewage treatment plants do a pretty good job, or else we would have been in a lot more trouble for a lot longer if our sewage treatment plants in North America couldn't do, and other places couldn't do its job of protecting us from diseases and stuff that end up in the water from sewage, right? Because sewage can be a nasty thing. Obviously, we've all smelt sewage, unfortunately. When you pass by a water treatment plant, it's not always great. Like a sewage treatment plant, it's not always great smelling. I had to visit one as part of my undergraduate work and looking at water pollution. It was not pleasant in certain spots, let me tell you this. But we learned a lot about that, and we learned that there's regulations that they have to follow, and that happens on a regular basis. However, there are times during major storm events, and not just hurricanes and cyclones and things like that, but major rainwater events where the sewage treatment facility can't keep up with all the water that's coming in because it's coming in from storm water, right? So all those sewers and everything that come in, those get treated before they go out a lot of those times. And so all that storm water is going out. There's all this nasty stuff that goes in there. Sewage treatment plants will let go a lot of their raw sort of sewage into the water because they can't hold it all within their facilities. And so all that raw sewage is going out into the ocean or into a major lake, depending on where you live, which will eventually get into the ocean. And so when we see more of those storms happen, we're seeing more and more of those that sewage go into the ocean. Now, this is what this study found. They looked at looking at the ocean spray and measuring the ocean spray, basically the air quality after that ocean spray happens, and where that stuff is going. And that's essentially what happens is all the sewage will kind of stay along the surface. So when the waves start crashing in on the beach or onto rocks or whatever, that ocean spray that comes out that a lot of times we like to see is great when you're in a pristine area. There's no rivers that are going out to it that have sewage in it. And it's beautiful to see that ocean spray. But a lot of times that ocean spray is staying in the air, and whatever is bound to it for a little bit, it just goes into the air. And so when this study measured the air quality, and I'll link to it it's in The Guardian, I'll link to it into the show notes so that you can look at it. all that ocean spray just goes up. All those particles go up in the air. The sewage is hydrophobic, meaning it doesn't bind to the water, so it stays in the air. And that aerosol, the air particles can actually stay in the air for quite a long time. They can move in quite a bit inland, like a mile or two inland, according to the article. They can actually travel hundreds of miles in, but the relative concentration of those sewage particles essentially sort of disperse over distance, so they're not as sort of harmful. But what they're worried about is that they could be harmful, to places along the coastline in that general area. Now, the article does state that there hasn't been any link to it yet of diseases happening or people getting sick more times after these storms when the ocean spray goes in, or when the aerosols are in, or those particles are in the air and those sewage particles are in the air. However, they are very concerned and they're going to do a follow-up. Again, this is the same thing as I mentioned last time. A lot of times when we're talking about sewage going out into the ocean, the major saying was, the solution to pollution is dilution. But again, not quite, especially when you have a lot of pollution going into a specific area that might already be high in nutrients. There's only so much nutrients that can dilute within an ocean area, and after a while it's going to cause a lot of problems, whether it be within the water in terms of excess nutrients, so you're getting excess algae and algal blooms like we see and we talked about last episode in Florida, or you're just going to see more growth of plants, aquatic plants, algae, everything that's in and around those areas. And then now you're going to see more sewage in that ocean spray. Now, I should mention that the study did look at the sewage particles in Tijuana where they're treated or held at least or received. And then they looked at the sewage particles that they found in the air and they matched. So they are linking it back to that sewage treatment plant in Tijuana. Now, there's a number of different issues within this. Obviously, the major issue here is the sewage treatment plant, how much it can actually take in and how much it can actually release. It's under a different country, so there are different regulations. I'm sure the U.S. has stricter regulations around water quality from a sewage treatment plant, just like it does in Canada. But in Mexico, I don't know what their restrictions are. I don't know what their regulations are. I don't know how well they adhere to that. There are a lot of times they're bigger cities. There are more people, maybe less technology, less money for that, or less money dedicated towards that. So we never really know. But I can't tell you for sure what those regulations are. What I can tell you is that increased storm events can release more sewage in the water. And since 2022, there are 13 billion gallons of water of raw sewage that was released. 13 billion. Think about that. 13 billion gallons that was released of raw sewage into the water. Now, here's the kicker. With climate change, always coming in with that climate change stuff. With climate change, we're seeing an increase in the number of storms, especially in California. We're seeing a lot, we're seeing drought, but we're seeing some major rainfalls happen at specific times. Over this past couple of months, we've seen a lot of rain hit Southern California and certain parts of Northern California, where you're seeing, flooding. There's sewage released because they can't hold that much in the sewage treatment plant. So you're seeing probably more sewage along California in general that are being released into the rivers. So we're probably going to see a lot more sewage. This could be problematic for a number of rivers and coastlines along the California Way, as well as other places too. If you start to think about how many other places, have sewage released into rivers, which is pretty much everywhere, what are those regulations like? Maybe the regulations, even if they were strict, didn't cover this type, because this is the first thing that we've really discovered in a while that shows that that we've linked that aerosols have sewage still in them after rainfall events. So it's obviously a scary thing. It's something that can be addressed. More research needs to be done. The research that they're talking about is to actually go and do straight 40 days of air sampling. And so hopefully they catch a number of storms during that time and see if that's a consistent thing. But obviously more research is needed. It's definitely concerning from a citizen point of view, from a North American point of view, that this can actually happen. And it'll be interesting to see what the results of this in other places, other locations along North America and around the world, of finding out how much raw sewage comes back in the air from the ocean spray. That's going to be an interesting study. I think it's interesting and concerning at the same time, but it definitely has to be addressed because this can affect human health as well as animal health in general. So something else to be concerned about. Obviously, not something I wanted to cover again. 3 bad kind of things in a row, shows in a row. We're talking about bad things happening in and around the ocean, but they all affect climate, or they're all exacerbated by climate. They all affect not only animals but us. Right, we're a type of animal, but it definitely affects us in a variety of different ways. So that's sort of the link between the last 3 episodes, even though they've been bad news, something that we need to be aware of and start, bringing people in. The call to action again is, obviously more research and support more research from these types of studies. But also start to talk to your politicians about this. This has to be done on a council level, on a local level, maybe even state level, to say, hey, our air quality may not be as good as we think. Even though we live in California or we live along the coastline, it may not be as that natural salty air may not be what we want it to be. And so we need to address that quickly, and we need to address that efficiently to get it done as soon as possible, and something to address. So something else to look out for, obviously something that I think was important to a lot of people. We have a lot of listeners in California, so I'm sure you'd want to hear that, as well as people who live along the coastline. So love to hear your thoughts on this. You can DM me at How to Protect the Ocean, at How to Protect the Ocean on Instagram, and you can email me if you go to speakupforblue.com. Just hit the contact us page, fill out the forms. It goes right to my email. I would love to hear from you. I want to thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of How to Protect the Ocean. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.